Ladies and gentlemen, America Emboldened presents Dr. Joseph P. Farrell.
All right, welcome, bold Americans, critical thinkers worldwide, back to America Emboldened. It's interview night with Michaels and Boulden, and tonight we are honored to once again present Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. If you haven't seen Joseph P. Farrell before on the show, please go back, watch those old episodes, listen to them, because every conversation has been an absolute joy with him that goes into multiple different places. So there's no boring episodes, no boring moments, and we're going to hopefully have another great grand conversation tonight in that same vein. So Michaels, I am looking forward to this greatly. How have you been, brother?
I've been pretty good. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, you know,
I pat off the dusts from whenever
I do. I was traveling to Puerto Rico for several weeks, meeting. Well, I guess I'd met all the family before in a previous trip, but going back and taking my own children now with the wife and I, and we had a good time. It was got to see a couple additional places, additional beaches, and relax and everything. But that's enough about that, because we've got a great guest in the wings. Yeah, this Dr. Farrell has a brand new book. When he was on last time, we talked about the first book, The Rialto in Richmond. The second book is now out, ladies and gentlemen, The Rialto in Richmond Reconstructed, called Confederates, Canada, and Carpetbaggers. It just debuted just last month in 2025. And he connects the dots, Michaels, in this new book, talking about kind of the financial and political parts of the Civil War that he didn't connect originally. Talks about how there's Confederate agents, some Northern financiers in the Canadian network, which I think he calls the opportunistic carpetbaggers, that would shape the monetary battleground that influenced the outcome of the Civil War. So we would encourage everybody to go get that book. And after you're done with this conversation, I'm sure you're going to want to do so as well. Without further ado, Dr. Farrell, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, guys. How you doing?
We're doing great. We've missed talking to you. A lot's been going on in life. Lots been going on in politics. And we had a much different conversation, I think, than what we're going to have tonight. Last time we spoke, but you know, I don't want to spoil all the places I want to go with today's conversation. What's new with you?
Hanging in there, like you guys said. I just had the new book come out, so I've been doing a lot of interviews on that. So ready to go.
Excellent. Well, Michaels, what's in the headlines right now? We thought we'd start off with some headlines for Dr. Farrell and then move into some of the deeper dive stuff that we prepared.
Well, let me tell you something. What is going on with the Ukraine, Russia, and all of that? I mean, to me, when I look at this conflict, it's supposed to be solved, right? It was supposed to be solved within a day. But I cannot help to shake that there are religious undertones throughout all of this.
Oh, yeah.
Between Roman Catholicism, Judaism, and Eastern Orthodoxy. Yeah.
Well, if you look at the Ukrainian war from that point of view, the Ukraine has always had a significant minority Jewish population that's been quite active. And the reason for that was that if you go back to Tsarist Russian times, the so-called Pale of Settlement within Imperial Russia, where Jews were allowed to settle, a great portion of that Pale of Settlement was in what would now be the modern-day Ukraine. So that's part of the story. The other part of the story, the cultural story, is something that most Americans completely forget because we're one of the most historically illiterate people on the planet. But that is the fact that at the end of World War I, Russia surrendered to the Central Powers, surrendered to Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. And at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March of 1918, which the Soviet Union signed, the Central Powers carved out an area of military occupation that German and Austrian forces predominantly, with some Ottoman forces in the Transcaucasus region. But they carved out an area of military occupation that would be roughly equivalent to the modern-day Baltic states, portions of Belarusia, all of Poland, and much of the modern Ukraine. That was the area that the Central Powers demanded from Russia as a result of their surrender in World War I. So that's a part of the story, and this is one reason that Russia is so very sensitive about the Ukraine, because they understand what an industrialized Germany can do if it's mobilized militarily. So you've got that lurking in the background with Russia. The other part of the problem is once you inject religion into it, particularly Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, within the history of the Ukraine in the 15th and 16th centuries, you had significant portions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that left the communion of Orthodoxy and placed themselves in communion with Rome. These are the so-called Greek Catholics. Sometimes they're called Greek Catholics. Sometimes they're called Uniats, Eastern Rite Catholics, and so on. So in other words, you've got a population that looks and uses the Orthodox ritual, but they're actually in communion with the papacy, okay? So you've got that tension because, of course, the Orthodox that stay Orthodox look at that as a betrayal of Orthodoxy. So you've got those tensions going on. And then the final component in this mix, and this is something that is currently lurking in the background of what's going on there. You have the ecumenical patriarchate, the Patriarchate of Constantinople, recently recognized the self-governing status of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and that took it out of communion with Moscow. All right. Now, under the way that the church administration has functioned up until the Bolshevik Revolution, this is a key problem in Orthodox Church history. Most of the overseas jurisdictions of the Orthodox Church fell under the Patriarchate of Moscow's jurisdiction because the Russians were the ones that were doing the actual expanding and missionary work overseas. The Patriarchate of Constantinople re-entered the picture, particularly in America, when a break occurred between the American and Russian church. And this occurred at the same time that the Patriarch of Constantinople was promoting neo-papal claims. This is another part of the story that you must be aware of. I personally have nothing to do with the Patriarchate of Constantinople for precisely that reason. They, in the process of recognizing the Ukrainian church's self-governing status under that authority, under those claims, they have in effect introduced a schism in the Orthodox Church between those loyal to the Patriarchate of Moscow and those loyal to the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The final part of this problem is that you have the Patriarchate of Constantinople for decades, really, has been financially sustained by the papacy and also by British and American intelligence. So when the Russians look at it, and I'm fully on board with the Russian point of view here, I want nothing to do with the Pope of Rome and his claims, period. I'm Orthodox.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
All right. But when you have those claims being behind the financial support of the ecumenical patriarchate, and then the patriarchate in turn making similar claims for itself. That gives you the jig. So as a result of what's going on between Russia and the Ukraine, you now have the patriarchates of Jerusalem and Antioch on the side of Moscow, and you have the patriarchate of Constantinople and Alexandria, and they're promoting Ukrainian autocephaly. So there's a religious intelligence background to this that most people are unaware of.
So under Stalin, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church became basically banned and put underground. Is that something that's playing a role in modern day? Is the
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they were pretty strongly aligned to the Vatican.
They're in communion with the Vatican.
Correct.
And this was the reason that they were so and I have to be blunt, mercilessly persecuted under Stalin. Stalin, not that he was, if it came down to persecution, he was much more inclined to persecute Roman Catholics, especially if they looked and dressed like Orthodox. So in other words, to the Soviet regime, the Greek Catholic Church, representing the papacy, was just about the last worst internal enemy that you could possibly dream of. So you've got that working in the mix and thinking of Ukrainians that want nothing to do with the Moscow Patriarchate. And again, what they will point out is that under Stalin revived the practice of Tsar Peter the Great by putting the clergy of the church and making them ministers or officers within the internal security apparatus, the intelligence apparatus of the state. Peter the Great did that. Stalin revived it. So you had a whole section of what would become the KGB that was populated by nothing but Orthodox clergy.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is a problem to the Western mentality, because the Western mentality wants to say, well, the KGB or the NKVD or MGB, whatever the initials were at the time,
right,
are infiltrating the church. But the same infiltration's going the other way around. You have the church infiltrating the security services. So it would be like the FBI decreeing that the Mormon church is an internal security threat and we have to keep tabs on it. So what do? Well, in typical FBI fashion, we're going to go out and recruit a bunch of Mormons to watch the Mormon church. And pretty soon you've got a whole branch of the FBI being run by the Mormons. So this is what happened inside the Soviet Union.
It's interesting that you go there, because I'm going to take that remind me, Michaels, to take that to the Catholic Church modern day in the United States and the FBI.
Yeah,
remind me to get there.
Exactly the same thing.
Yes. So we'll get there in a second. So the ROC, the Russian side, they have, and I remember Putin sat down with Tucker Carlson. That was a whole folder thing. Where basically, he basically was saying that this was a war against Western secularism. It was a war against the moral decay, correct?
Yes.
And you did a great job just outlining why religion matters going back to the 16th century. Just that's why I love you. Like, you're able to get to the meat and potatoes immediately with Michael's question. That was awesome, because that connects some dots for me. But my question would be, the Vatican itself under Pope Francis, I don't think ever strongly condemned Russia or Putin and the war from anything that I saw as a Catholic. So I'm wondering, is there also pressure from the Ukrainian Orthodox GCC to get the Vatican to take a more vocal approach under Leo now? Do you think that you're going to see a more synergistic Vatican in this war effort in Ukraine?
You might. I'm not personally aware of any pressure from the Ukrainian Union churches on Rome. But if you look at some of Pope Leo XIV's statements recently, particularly with what's going on with respect to Gaza, we've had Catholic churches there attacked by the IDF for no good reason that I can tell. Yep. So I'm not aware of that, but I can imagine that it's going to be at least one part of Vatican diplomacy in this pontificate, for the very simple reason that Francis, people forget what Francis did do in terms of ecumenical cooperation. He had that meeting with Patriarch Kirill in Havana, Cuba, where they both issued this joint declaration on Christian rights and Christians being persecuted in the Middle East. So it's something that I wouldn't be surprised that they might both do. And to get Kirill on board with something like that. Kirill is not an ecumenist at all.
No, he was basically, he claimed that the Ukraine was a threat to Russian existence, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And it's important to understand what I think Kirill means when he says Russian existence, a threat. He means it primarily culturally. And I really suspect that he's not even as concerned about the Unia churches as much as he is concerned about the neo-Nazis that the Zelensky government represents. And, that whole cesspool of, I don't know what you'd call it, neo-Zionism, who knows what it is, but whatever crazy. It is, it's not Greek Catholic.
No, it's absolutely bizarre that you have
totally
a Jewish C-list comedian that likes playing instruments with various body parts. His whole cabinet.
Let's call it what it is, Chris. It's his tallywhacker. All right.
We don't want the YouTube censors.
Yes, we don't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
It's okay. Since we lost the channel, there's not that many viewers yet. So if they do take us, go to Rumble. Make sure you're supporting us on Rumble and all the free speech areas.
But seriously, then you've got neo-Nazis backing the whole thing, right? And then I love the fact that there are American laws that were passed that says you cannot fund Nazism in any capacity. And here we are, hand over fists,
funding it,
whatever you'd like, whatever you want.
Well, I mean,
it's crazy.
They've also made it so basically you're anti-Semitic if you point out the fact that you are funding Nazism,
right?
Because they've said, "Oh no, this is a just cause."
Yes.
We've got.
Well, this is the problem with this war in the Ukraine, and again, the part of it that's bothered me the most is this suggestive connection between this neo-Nazi government, and I think the Russians are absolutely correct in qualifying it that way. They were qualifying it that way since 2013 when Sergei Glaziev said our problem isn't the Nazis in Kiev, it's the Nazis in Washington. So, the Russians haven't been mincing their words. It's just nobody's been paying attention to them. But my problem is, okay, we've got this, whatever he is that is president of the Ukraine. Is he a neo-Zionist, what is he? But it's this fascist Zionist connection that we see in the Ukraine. And we've seen this before during the whole Nazi era and the immediate aftermath of certain Zionists actually collaborating with the Third Reich in order to create the climate of opinion, to get the Jewish homeland. Rudolf Kostner, the whole trial of that doctor in post-war Israel that was covered by Ben Hecht, of all people, a Jewish playwright and screenwriter for Rod Serling, is writing a whole book about this. And again, it gets ignored. But there's a pattern here that, as far as I'm aware, nobody has tried to tie that period of that collaboration, grisly as it is, with what's going on in the Ukraine. What's this about?
Well, what I was going to ask, if you look at history, I worked in the Diocese of Wilmington for about 10 years. And I noticed that there were some people being becoming ordained as priest that were coming from government backgrounds, or they left the priesthood to go to high Washington, D.C. government backgrounds. So, for example, we had one priest who was ordained during my tenure who was previously a Secret Service agent for Bill Clinton and had been married. And I had expressed my, curiosities that perhaps this individual did not care about becoming a priest, but rather was a plant to be put into the diocese for intelligence gathering.
Right.
We had a Ukrainian who was part of the Orthodox we just talked about at the top here. And he left the priesthood, and he now works adjacent to the FBI in Washington, D.C.
I can believe it.
And has children. And so I wonder how much people use religion and infiltrate the ordained life of the church in order to do these biddings. And how many, 50 years? Are we going back World War II? How long has this been going on?
Well, it's been going on throughout Christian history. And I gave you the example of Stalin. I gave you the example of Peter the Great. If you look at the history of the church at virtually any age, you're going to find this constant interface between intelligence agencies or intelligence services and the clergy. And I think there's a very good reason that this goes on, and why intelligence agencies are always so insistent upon not only recruiting clergy, but having that recruited clergy keep an eye on the clergy that they can't recruit. And it's for the very simple reason that the church has up-to-date, on the ground, boots on the ground intelligence of what the state of any society is, right down to the local level. You cannot, I can guarantee you, having been in ecclesiastical life and seen and watched it work. I was teaching as an assistant professor in a small Orthodox seminary in Pennsylvania, as I like to call it. And we knew at least a year ahead of time that the Soviet Union was going to collapse. Wow. And this was before our intelligence agency, the wonderful CIA, came out with a briefing that said, oh, no, they're not in any danger of collapsing. We knew.
Right.
And part of the reason we knew is we had a bunch of our clergy inside the KGB that were telling us this, So yeah, and by the same token, if you think the Orthodox Church is a good boots on the ground intelligence organization, look at the Roman Catholic Church.
Correct.
With the centralized administrative structure, with a financial structure that's international in scope to go with it. So you'd be a fool if you're an intelligence case officer and not attempt to do this. And the other problem that you're always going to have is, like it or not, the church is not the state, no matter how friendly it may appear to be. It is an institution unto itself. It is a culturally sovereign entity. And that's as true of the Roman Church as of the Orthodox Church, the Coptic Church. They are all their own little thing. And the reason why is they have their own structure of government, and it's been there from the very start of it.
Yeah, they have their own lawyers.
They have their own lawyers. They have their own law. Yeah,
Yes.
it's... So it is, from the cultural and political point of view, the church is always a potential threat. Always.
Do you think that since church population, let's just call it religious populations in the West, mostly Christian populations, since that membership is declining, do you think they're trying to replace the church with artificial intelligence to get that same kind of effect, where AI is considered God? And
that is a whopper.
All asking these very, very sensitive topics to artificial intelligence. and people don't realize that this is going to be used for a dossier.
I let me go further. Let me extend your question, Chris, because that's a whopper. The way I am increasingly looking at it is what they are trying to do is they're putting into place counterfeits of Christian culture across the board.
Wow.
So in other words, if I tell people, what does antichrist mean? Well, if you look at anti in Greek, the little prefix anti in Greek means two things. It can mean against, or it can mean in place of. So what they're trying to do is they're putting into place a system which mimics all the aspects of all the core doctrines of Catholic Christendom, little c in both cases. So in other words, when you're dealing with the communio sanctorum, with the communion of saints in the creed, what do they intend to create by the introduction of neural nets, the internet of bodies, and having everybody directly wired into the internet? Yeah. Well, that is a secular version, and I think a grisly one, of what is meant by the communion of saints. By the same token, they are attempting to introduce a surveillance system in connection with a financial system that is a replacement for the omnipresence and omnipotence of God.
Right.
So in other words, you look at all the key doctrines of Christianity in any of its classical expressions, Protestant, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic, whatever. If you look at all those classical doctrines and how they were formulated and what they mean, and you look at what the transhumanists and progressives and technocrats are trying to put into place, what they're trying to put into place is a counterfeit of it.
Right.
Because there's one key crucial thing that they've got to get rid of. Well, several key things, but they're all related. They've got to get rid of the image of God in man. And that means they've got to get rid of God, and they've got to get rid of human freedom and responsibility and, all that goes with it. So yeah, I'm getting where you're coming from, and I'm seeing you and raising the ante even more. I think this is what they're up to.
Well, two quick things. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of an article that you wrote about the adverse events of the COVID shots when they first came out. You had written of a test where somebody said they no longer feel God.
Yes.
With that. Yes. That reminds me of that. And then today, the United Nations, with their climate change Gestapo, they said, now this is from the International Court of Justice President Yuji Iwasawa today. The adverse effects of climate change may significantly impair the enjoyment of certain human rights. Now, here's the kicker, including the right to life.
Excuse me?
Including the right to life.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going to use it as a bench, a benchmark or a bellwether to say, okay, you've had enough life. Now, any further life for you is going to be a threat to the environment. Yeah. It's going to be Logan's Run.
Aren't we kind of looking at that right now?
Yeah.
When we see the weather manipulation, when we see what's going on. I mean, anyone who is not at this point in time realizing that things are being manipulated and it's not natural. Like,
no, it's not.
You can look at data and you can see where, okay, global warming and stuff, where they said we should be, we've never reached it.
Right.
That I was told when I was in 8th grade that we would see the shoreline of Delaware start to recede and recede. So by the time I'm almost 50, which I'm almost 50 now, that I should not have any beachfront down by our beaches where I've been going. It hasn't changed whatsoever. All right. So that's the first part. The second part of it, though, is when you look at the weather radar, I've been noticing that you get these clusters not next to bodies of water where there is just immense amounts of moisture going into the system. And we just got nailed here in Delaware. And I noticed we're out of a drought, but if you just go like 30 miles west of us, they're in a drought. Yes. And it's because all these storms are forming, not near bodies of water where it normally would form. As a guy who's a nerd with the weather, I pay attention to this stuff.
Yep.
We are being manipulated in some way, shape, or form. And the narrative had to be written first so people wouldn't question it.
Yes, I'll doff my hat. Ding, ding, ding. Look, I totally agree, and I believe, and I've stated on many occasions, that the climate change narrative was a narrative invented to cover the existence of weather manipulation technologies. So I don't know if you're familiar or if you guys have ever interviewed Ilana Freeland, but she's written books on the weather manipulation story that I absolutely love her books because she pulls no punches. And I interviewed her once on my website, and during the interview she said something that just has stuck with me to this day. She said that the weather manipulation and engineering technologies are so off the charts in their capability, and they have been used for so long that there is no more such thing as purely natural weather.
Yep.
And I can attest to that. I'm like you. I watch these weather radars, and I'm absolutely flabbergasted at what I've seen on some occasions. The biggest one that I can remember, Greg, and you guys may remember this as well, when Hurricane Katrina hit, I was watching it track through the Gulf of Mexico, and yes, I'm going to keep calling it the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you very much. Just like I'm going to keep using the definite article with the Ukraine. We're watching this hurricane moving from east to west through the Gulf of Mexico and listening to the weather reports. Oh, this looks like it's going to hit around Houston or Galveston, blah, blah, blah. And then we watched it stop due south of New Orleans, make a 90-degree turn, and plow into New Orleans. And just before it plowed into New Orleans, I remember watching a weather report of the jet stream. And it looked like someone had literally taken the jet stream and moved it from Michigan down to northern Louisiana in a heartbeat in a last-ditch effort to steer that tornado away from New Orleans. That's what it looked like. And I remember it so much because apparently Richard Hoagland was watching the same channel, because he called me up that very night. He says, "Are you watching this weather?" And I said, "Yes, I am, Richard. And I know what you're going to ask me, Richard. And yes, I do think this is engineered." So yeah, I know what you're talking about with the weird weather radar. Absolutely.
Yeah, we had Dr. Ned Nikolov on the show about a year and a half ago. And he is a physical scientist who has published peer-reviewed, basically debunking climatology and the climate science. And he's been blacklisted across the board for his papers. But what he got down to was, he said, look, I can look at all the different planets around us, and I can see where the pressure on these planets is changing, which means climate is changing, just as the pressure on the Earth is changing, which means climate's changing. He's like, we are a drop of a pin compared to what the Earth is actually doing to us. What we got down to was, he said, look, what Al Gore should have focused on was the fact that we should be responsible with how we get rid of our waste, because that does pollute the earth, and the fact that it pollutes our bodies and stuff. But as far as what we're doing pollution wise and whether it's an immediate threat to climate and global warming, no, it's not. And so that came directly from Dr. Nikolov. He brought the science. It was a very, very well reviewed show. Matter of fact, we should bring him back, Michaels, to see what he's up to now. Dr. Farrell's kind of remind me of this, but my point is, so I'll just put this out there because I don't even care anymore about who's going to listen and come find me on some of this stuff. I got a phone call about last November from a person who said, I need to get in touch with Donald Trump, which kind of I laugh because I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And it said, well,
him in your phone?
Yeah, but they're like, well, you have connections to people.
Have him on speed dial.
Yeah, right.
Well, they said to me, you have connections to people that are close to him. So perhaps you could do something to help us, get in touch. And I did. I had some people that were lined up to be in cabinet members or close to the cabinet. Mm-hmm. This individual sat down. I know for a fact I did not listen into the call because I wanted to be able to have plausible deniability. But this person has evidence of not just weather manipulation, mm-hmm. but manipulation with the fires, with weapons, mm-hmm. of things that are being used. And I know for a fact that this is sound at this point in time. And mm-hmm. I don't understand why the administration is not doing anything about it, knowing that the information is now in their hands, unless there's people at the level of Space Force and people at a different level of government that are controlling all these things that have nothing to do with anything our elected officials could do something about. What's your thoughts on that?
My thought is watch my blogs on my website this week. I have a blog coming up that may be connected to this question very directly. Okay. Because you're never going to guess what the California state authority that manages its power grid is now wanting to do.
Oh, this is spicy.
They now want to turn over management of power outages to artificial intelligence.
Naturally. What else would you want? We
of course.
Last time.
Of course. And Mr. Trump is fully on board with, he just signed some piece of regulation today, clearing away the regulations for more AI development. And this is why we have to build all the power plants, because our current power grid is totally inadequate to funding the AI data centers, much less any cryptocurrency mining that we might want to be doing, or as I like to call them, the klepto currency mining that we might want to be doing with respect to the sovereign wealth fund.
Oh, let's get into money.
Let's talk about that for a second. Hold on.
Sure.
Yeah, that was Michael's nose. This is something that I wanted to talk to you about because it's been bothering the heck out of me.
Thank God you didn't swear. I was worried.
Oh my! So I'm the clean one, Joseph. I'm the clean one. He's the comedy hour here. So all right.
No playing piano with your tallywhackers.
Exactly. I know. I try not to. I mean, I hit so many keys. All right.
In other words, you play in the cracks, huh?
I got a 2-octave range. All right, that's enough of that. All right. So talk about cryptocurrency. I had been approached literally like 20 years ago, 15 years ago by an ex-student who wanted me to invest in this cryptocurrency known as Bitcoin at the time. I turned it down because I saw it being used on Silk Road and I thought it was illegal. I didn't feel good about it. Mm-hmm. I now feel like a moron because I wouldn't be doing this conversation. I'd be on a yacht somewhere having a good life with the price that thing's at this point in time. I still have a good life, so I'm not upset about that. But my point is, I see the manipulation of cryptocurrencies. I see this president profit $2 billion before even getting into office off his Trump coin. Mm-hmm. And now I'm seeing that, I studied the banking systems pretty heavily, as Michael's knows, for like the last 3 years. Credit Suisse, the milkshake theory of the United States, the dollar. And XRP is being used by JP Morgan. It's being used by Chase. It's being used by Bank of America. Mm-hmm. There's this SEC lawsuit that now looks like it's getting lifted, and people are pumping money into this like you wouldn't believe. Like I'm looking at the exchanges and seeing that it went from I think $1.69 to $3.42 for one XRP. all that is a financial transaction piece that people are owning. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, why is it, well, not even why. I'm trying to understand the intrinsic value of something that's worthless. We already have fiat currency, so perhaps we're all used to it, the worthless piece of paper. But are they preparing us to change us over to this digital currency? And if you're not invested in it, are you going to wind up poor? Or if you're invested in it, are you actually just helping the overall lords of us get richer while the peons continue to be peons?
It's a beast.
What's the game?
It's a beast system. It's a beast system. I firmly believe that what they're attempting to do is they know that a direct introduction of central bank digital currency is not going to fly. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to sneak it in under a variety of guises, with the end result being the same. A klepto currency, as I like to call them, is exactly that. It's a way of stealing your assets and giving you nothing. So in the case of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, what's the collateral that they're really after here? It's all the federal land in exchange for blips on a computer screen. Let's look at the state bullion deposit. This is why that sequel to the Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed is so crucial. And it's, by the way, one of the reasons I wrote these two books right now, because they're trying the same playbook again, but with a huge difference from the same playbook that they've tried before. Before it was just the South that was the grand opportunity zone. Now it's the whole country and all of our assets. Okay, that's what they're tendering for. So look at how they're doing this. They have, in the past, I'd say decade and a half, they have promoted these movements for sound constitutional money, meaning gold or bullion-backed money, but primarily gold, because, of course, the bimetallic system that was originally constitutional in this country, they got rid of during Reconstruction.
Correct.
Okay, so that's a little hint for you, folks, right there. And by the way, coming from one of the most corrupt administrations in American history, Grant, who controlled what? Tariffs, and the people that he appointed to collect the tariffs. Is this sounding vaguely familiar? Okay. So they've promoted these state bullion depositories, Texas being the first out of the chute. Then we had Utah, and now we've got a whole bunch of states in the country that are making gold and silver legal tender again by passing laws taking sales tax off of them. Okay. What they're also doing now, and when this started, I thought, oh, this could be good. And it could have been, until the next step was taken when Texas and now other states have started talking about electronic transfer systems. So what are they doing? And I didn't make this clear the last time we talked about this issue, so I'm going to try and make it clear this time. At the end of the war between the states, the Union had three different kinds of circulating money. It had specie, which is gold and silver coins. It had monetized debt, in other words, circulating paper money that was circulating against a bond issued by the government. Okay. And that monetized debt was ultimately understood to be convertible to specie. Okay. And then you had the Lincoln greenbacks, which were not monetized debt. They were debt-free legal tender paper certificates that were not backed by anything. Okay. That's what you had. At the end of the Civil War, the Union debt had ballooned to over $1.3 billion, which at that time is an astronomical sum of money. So to make the money sound, they had to start backing it with bullion again. This meant that they had to either revalue the amount of gold and silver that the Lincoln greenback would buy, or to bring the greenback into parity with the specie conversion, they had to take so many greenbacks out of circulation. One of those two things. Right. They either had to revalue or deflate. That's the key. That word right there.
Deflate, right.
Because if you look at what happened under Ulysses Grant, they demonetized silver. In fact, they did that way before Grant. At a time, incidentally, this will tell you that this was deliberate financial policy, that they need not have done this, because what was just discovered during the Civil War, the Comstock lode of silver out in Nevada. Oh, we've got all this silver. We could perhaps use some of that silver to make the greenbacks convertible to specie, but no, we're going to demonetize it. Okay, then we're going to pull as many greenbacks as we can out of circulation. There's your key, by the way, to your secret finance of hidden technology. Right there. Right there. And later on, we are going to make the greenback, by the Resumption Act of 1875, convertible to specie, in this case, gold. All right? So look what they did. They deflate the currency in order to make the convertibility practical again. Then they introduce a measure in 1875 converting the greenback to gold convertibility. So what they did was they redefined the nature of the greenback. And oh, looky, isn't it interesting that on Confederate currency of 1864, you had a little declaration that said the Confederate States will pay to the bearer on demand X number of dollars 10 years after the conclusion of a treaty of peace between the Confederate States and the United States of America. So in other words, what these, I really want to use a word here, but I probably shouldn't.
Do it.
What these... Well, to put it euphemistically, what these financial turds in the punch bowl during intermission at the opera, what these people did was they converted the Lincoln greenback into the same kind of currency that the Confederacy used during the war. Ain't that interesting? By a sleight of hand. Okay? And by that... what I suspect they did was that plus the deflationary policy plus Reconstruction put a lien on the labor of the entire South for, up at least until Franklin Roosevelt, and put a lien on the labor of the Confederacy in order to repay all that debt that the Union and the Confederacy had accumulated during the war. That's how they pleased their masters. Now look at the state bullion depositories. This is all leading up to what's going on now, because they are not following the deflation route. What they're saying is our electronic transfer systems are gold backed. So we're backing all those dollars with an electronic transfer system that says, yeah, we've got the gold that will back your dollars. What they're not telling you is that the amount of gold backing your dollar bill is a tiny little fleck of gold. And it would take a computer to compute, and this is why they're tying it electronically to digital transfer systems, because they can claim gold backing. But only the computer can calculate that infinitesimal amount of gold that your dollar is now supposedly worth. So what they're creating is, in effect, a gold-backed system that only works for the super rich. If I've got $1 billion of Federal Reserve notes and I decide I want to convert this to gold, well, yeah, we'll honor your convertibility. You just buy the necessary gold. Can you and I do that? Is that real convertibility? Absolutely not. So in other words, what they're doing is they're putting a tender out there for hard assets in return for electronic junk.
Wow.
It's the same playbook that as was used after Reconstruction, just sans the digital aspect of it. That's what it looks like to me.
There's been.
Do you think there's a European element to all of this? Because in your book, the Rialto,
Are you kidding?
in Richmond, we have the Erlanger loan,
Yes,
right, which comes into play, basically saying that the Europeans, including Otto von Bismarck, I had no idea he was going to take a play into this, saying that we will, help out the South in some way, in some form or another.
Actually, Bismarck was more in line with helping the North.
Oh, well, you're right. You're right in that, because I'm
France and England were with the Confederacy. Russia and Prussia were the ones backing the North.
You're correct. Obviously, you wrote the book, but I'm trying to get it right here. I'm reading it. I have it open in front of me, but I'm trying to get to the point of is Europe playing a far larger part than we're giving them credit for? And this goes back to the Civil War with the Erlanger loan. And there was another quote you had in here about how the bankers in Europe said that we as business owners no longer want to foot the bill for labor. So the way to control labor is to control the money supply and how much it's actually worth.
Bingo. Look, Catherine Fitz is on to part of this when she said the problem with slavery was the perfectibility of the collateral. Slaves would run away. Okay? Now with the surveillance system that they're trying to put into place, you can't run away.
Right.
So in other words, as they're putting in this new, they're really putting in a very old financial system. But the other problem here is, as far as France and Great Britain were concerned, these were colonial empires that depended upon their sea power to maintain their colonial empire, particularly England. So if you look at what the Palmerston government in England and what Napoleon III in France are doing during the Civil War, what are they doing? Well, they're putting their troops in Canada and their puppet emperor in Mexico, backed by a few thousand French troops. Why? Well, it's nice if we can break up this thing that's looming on the horizon on the North American continent and split that apart, which is easy to do because look at what you have in the United States at the time. Listen carefully, folks. You've got two different cultures and two different societies that are trying to be held together by a common governmental process. Process never unifies cultures. Ever. It's a lesson we haven't really learned.
Do you think that the Prussians were potentially playing both sides?
Hang on, we're getting to yeah. This is why the sequel is important. Okay, we're getting to Otto von Bismarck because when one of the turds in the punch bowl during intermission at the opera ends his second term in office, we're talking about Ulysses Grant here, folks. Okay, what does he do? Well, he decides with his newly found riches, gee, I wonder how he got all those. Okay, he decides to go on a circumnavigation of the world. Okay, so he tours the world for 2 years. And of course, he goes to Europe. And he just happens to stop off in Berlin to have cigars and tea with his old friend Otto von Bismarck, who's now Reichskanzler Bismarck. You know, we've got a big shiny new German empire. So Grant and Bismarck are hobnobbing there in Berlin, smoking cigars and having tea at the Stadtschloss. And golly, I can just imagine them doing nothing but talking and sharing pictures of their grandkids. I don't think they talked about anything else
Well,
maybe they might have said a few words about all those American sovereign bonds that Prussia bought during the Civil War. Maybe they said something about why Count von Zeppelin was over here helping the Union Army and having his picture taken with Ulrich Dahlgren. Let me repeat that. Having his picture taken with Ulrich Dahlgren, Zeppelin. Maybe all of that weird German connection that Walter Bosley has uncovered with the airship mystery might have something to do with this.
Yes.
Maybe the fact that President Abraham Lincoln himself went to Congress to get funding for the development of airship technology, which, by the way, happened in 1863. And by the way, the man that Lincoln was really interested in backing apparently tested one of his airships that was flying around at 200 miles an hour and capable of self-maneuvering. So we're not talking a Civil War observation balloon here. And by the way, it may be that maybe he was talking with von Bismarck about why his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, seemed to block the whole thing at every turn that he could. So in other words, is Europe involved in this? Up to its earlobes.
All right. So I think, Michaels, this leads to...
That was a yes, Chris.
No,
Yeah.
good. Because I was going to ask you about the Sonora Air Club.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm getting at here.
Exactly.
Where did the airship mystery end up? Texas.
Yes.
Where's Jefferson Davis trying to flee to?
Texas.
Oh.
Texas.
Now, do you think they used that technology as collateral
Possibly.
with the Erlanger loan?
Very possibly. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
The actual stated collateral on the Erlanger loan bonds is cotton,
Right.
and the Confederacy is paying usurious amounts of interest on that cotton. But for me, the story of the Erlanger loan isn't so much the amount of it, it's who is involved as underwriters and investors in those bonds, particularly in Great Britain. On the French side, we have the Emperor Napoleon III himself backing the bonds, because the bonds are supposed to be used to pay for Confederate ironclads to be built in French shipyards. And Napoleon III initially backs the scheme and then pulls out of it. If you go across the channel to England, who's involved as members and investors in the Erlanger loan? Well, let's see. We have the personal secretary to Lord Palmerston. Okay, so that's a little hint that this is going pretty high. We have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who, by the way, at the time just happens to be William Gladstone. We have, by the way, the Keeper of the Privy Seal for the British Commonwealth of Nations, the British Empire. So in other words, you have all of the essential players and mechanisms of the British government, with maybe the exception of Queen Victoria, that are backers and investors in this loan. And believe me, at the end of the war, when the Union tries to go after in court and recover some of those funds, these people are there and resisting every step of the way. Gladstone, all the way up to his premiership, insisted that his name was never correctly on the lists of subscribers. And by the way, he was called out by the Union ambassador to France for it. So in other words, are the Europeans involved in the background of the Civil War? Well, I think there's a case to be made when you examine the financial connections of the New England bankers that are bankrolling John Brown to go out and cause all sorts of trouble in Kansas, and then later go down to Harper's Ferry, of course, for his infamous raid there. When you look at his financial backers, all of those backers are coming from that New England secularized Yankee Calvinist what else to call it, flesh pot in New England, those people, as the Southerners like to say at the time. And if you track those connections to Great Britain, you've got a real story of some real financial malfeasance and geopolitics going on. And let's not forget Tsar Alexander II.
Tell us
what did he do? Well, he's the other great emancipator of the 19th century. Tsar Alexander II was the emancipator of the Russian serfs. Why? Why does Russia emancipate the serfs? Well, because they had concluded during the Crimean War that if Russia wanted to maintain its position as a world power with the European powers, feudalism and serfdom weren't going to work. They would have to industrialize, and the way to do that was free the serfs. So in Russia, Alexander and his ministers come up with a plan to manumit the serfs, grant them low-interest government loans. Listen to this program and compare it to what we did. Grant them low-interest government loans to buy the land that they farm from their feudal lords. The feudal lords, in turn, get a financial compensation for the loss of their land and their labor. And you transform Russian agriculture from the middle of the 19th century to the outbreak of World War I. Russia becomes the breadbasket of Europe, and industrialization starts. What do the Bolsheviks do, incidentally, when they come into office? They turn the whole clock backward. And even that clock, they don't really go all the way. Lenin's new economic policy. Well, maybe a little capitalism is good. Or Stalin's 4-year plans. Oops, we'd better industrialize, and we better industrialize real fast, because that German thing over there certainly didn't stop. So in other words, Alexander II is a key part of the story. Why? Because he manumits the slaves in Russia. And then, because he sees Britain and France and is requested by Britain and France to recognize the Confederacy along with them, Alexander tells them, take a hike. And then he sends his fleets to San Francisco and New York as a little sign of support for Mr. Lincoln. And later, when he's interviewed about why did you do that, he says, well, I didn't do it for any love of the American Republic. I was doing it to prevent the British from gaining and maintaining a monopoly on the industrial technologies of Europe. And I was therefore doing it for the support of Mother Russia, much more than for the American Republic. And then, one more thing, Chris, for your European question.
Wow. Okay.
Jefferson Davis, what was he before the war? Well, he was Secretary of War to President Franklin Pierce, a New Englander. Okay? Good friends with Franklin Pierce. During his stint as Secretary of War, Davis was one, just like Abraham Lincoln, he was a railroad guy. And he was scouting out routes for transcontinental railroads across the continent, particularly southern routes, of course. But you had the Transcontinental Railroad project looming in the background here as a geopolitical enterprise. Let's remember, the war between the states was the first time in military history that significant amounts of troops were moved by rail at a crucial juncture in a battle. And the battle was the first battle of Bull Run, and the first people to do that and prove the utility of railroads for troop movements was General Joseph Johnston of the Confederacy. Okay, so in other words, this war is also telling the British that this railroad technology is going to transform the world and make sea power, our power, obsolescent. This is the background to Sir Halford Mackinder. So what's the other great transcontinental railroad project of that era? It's the Trans-Siberian in Russia. Mm-hmm. It's that railroad link that's going to link together all of Russia. Who are the engineers involved in the project? They're American.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Interesting. And now let's go one little step further. This is really going to make people stop and think. In 1867, what did we do? Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln, William Seward, spent a little amount of money to buy Alaska from Russia, who were perfectly willing at the time to sell it to us. Okay? What was the purpose of it? The purpose was a trans-global railroad across the Bering Strait, a channel.
Wow.
A channel project. Tsar Nicholas II even floated bonds for it. So in other words, you're looking at a lot of geopolitics, because what's the British response to the threat of a trans-global railroad link between North America and Siberian Russia? Transfer lots of naval technology to Japan.
Of course, naturally.
Of course, the one country with the power and the technology and the will and means to interdict such a link.
So
what happens at the end of the 19th century? Sir Halford Mackinder formulates Mackinder's basic thesis of geopolitics. Who dominates the pivot area, which is the Eurasian landmass? Dominates the world. Who is able to dominate the heartland dominates the Eurasian landmass. What's the heartland? Well, basically, it's Eastern Europe and European Russia. And then the third component of that, the one that everybody forgets, is who dominates Berlin is able to dominate the heartland.
Oof. I had no idea of the genesis of the 1904-1905 war between Russia and Japan. I had no idea.
And who was the negotiator that arbitrated the peace between the two?
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt. And what resulted from that war and that peace? Well, who got Manchuria? Japan.
Japan did, yeah.
And what resulted from that? Well, the Trans-Siberian link, which to Vladivostok flowed at that time through Manchuria. So the Russians had to rebuild that whole wing of the Trans-Siberian around Manchuria to Vladivostok, which is the current route. So yeah, there's a lot of geopolitics going on in the background of the Civil War and throughout the rest of the 19th century on up into the 20th. Absolutely.
Getting back to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Hold on, this all connects.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like you need 3 more books. Not trying to give you more writing to do, but the bastard Woodrow Wilson.
Boy,
that's how I always refer to him when he comes up on my shows. I always refer to him as the bastard Woodrow Wilson that sold out the United States.
Here. Off my hat in total agreement.
Yep. So, the Federal Reserve obviously followed models of Europeans in the way that was influenced. I was a huge Ron Paul supporter back in 2008. Read a lot about the creature from Jekyll Island in Georgia and learned things that I never knew before. But Chris's question about, European influence, a lot of people had said, did Europe influence the decentralized bank? And if you look at, there's maybe a conspiracy side to that, but you can't deny the fact you got Paul Warburg, who was a German banker, who was the architect of the Federal Reserve. I mean, that can't be ignored. You have a senator who ended up bringing all these people together that were tied to Rothschild thought processes and what they were thinking.
Senator Aldrich.
Yes, Nelson. Yeah, yep. So you have all these players that were coming from a European background and being influenced. We get the Federal Reserve. We get a worthless currency. We get a system now that you have Donald Trump in present day saying Powell needs to lower the interest rates or we want him gone. I know Catherine Austin Fitz has talked about these type of things with the currency as well. I've listened to her speak about this, but I'm curious if you could continue to write books that track what happened after the Civil War, how the 1907 panic may have been a manipulation in order to push a further plan that had started. And with cryptocurrency, here's the connection for the final book. Can you learn from Jefferson Davis about over-promising about, hey, you know what? After the war is over, this will be worth something. Is cryptocurrency backed by promise of payment in the future?
Ding, ding, ding.
Can we learn something from 1864, 1865 from studying this? So that's what I've heard throughout what you're talking about.
The cryptocurrency link is definitely there, and that's why I wrote the second book. Okay. In other words, what I'm asking people to do in these books, the reason I wrote these books now is because they are absolutely directly relevant to what's happening now. And what I want people to do is read these books and read between the lines and make the connections as you've just done. So in other words, yes, that Confederate promise to pay is exactly what you're getting with the cryptocurrency. Now, can I write books tying together the Reconstruction story with the Federal Reserve and beyond? Yes, I can, but it's unnecessary for me to do so because somebody else already has. And that somebody is Anthony Sutton and his 3 books. I don't know if you're familiar with the 3 books. Well, Anthony Sutton was a scholar in residence at the Hoover Institute. So in other words, this is not a guy purveying conspiracy theory, folks. Sutton wrote 3 books, and they are telling in their implications. What you will immediately latch onto it when I tell you the 3 titles. And by the way, Sutton is an old school academic. He knows how to footnote, and he knows the proper orthography for doing so, unlike most modern Americans mistrained in our education system. He knows how to footnote.
Does he use an Oxford comma?
No, I don't think he does.
Well,
But you know where my loyalties lie.
Of course.
But or at least they did before that institution fell off the kookery cliff with everybody else. But anyway, Sutton wrote 3 books.
Yeah, I just looked them up.
Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. Wall Street and the Bolsheviks. Wall Street, and I believe it's Wall Street and the Rise of Roosevelt, or Wall Street and Roosevelt. That's the one I can never remember. In other words, what he's suggesting to you is that the financiers of Wall Street, and therefore of the City of London, because they're connected, read Carroll Quigley, were engaged in a massive experiment to see which form of socialism they wanted to promote. International communism in the Soviet Union, National Socialism and Fascism in Nazi Germany, or Roosevelt New Deal socialism and crony capitalism in the United Soviet dystopian states of America. Which version works the best for us? Okay. That's essentially what he did in those 3 books. Take those 3 books, tie them together with the 3 books of Carroll Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, The Anglo-American Establishment, and the 3rd book, okay, which is a little mentioned, often overlooked book that he was working on at the end of his life. I forget what the title is. Tie those books together and then add 1 more by the former Librarian of Congress, James Billington, called Fire in the Minds of Men, about the revolutionary movements from the Bavarian Illuminati up through the 19th century. Put all those books together and you have what's been going on in the world. I don't need to write them. All I'm doing in my books is I'm kind of with the books that deal with the modern age, I'm kind of adding to the story that they've already told and brought so far, or in writing these Civil War books, pushing the narrative back a bit. But, I've pushed it even further back in Babylon's Banksters and Financial Vipers of Venice. This is an old story. The template really hasn't changed all that much.
Well, Michaels, we had some viewer questions that come in from comments from previous shows with Farrell and people making connections. I'm going to start here, and then I know you had one from Ashton that we wanted to ask because I thought that was interesting. A friend of mine is reading a book that Michael Bednark had talked about in his book called A New Science of Heaven. And he reaches out to me and he says to me, he's like, Greg, did you know that there's this theory that plasma is intelligent? And I said, have you ever watched any of our shows with Dr. Joseph Farrell? And he goes, no. I said, well, do me a favor. Let's go back. Let's listen there. And then he's got a book. Let's get into that. Are we seeing, well, I already know we are, but is there an awakening to the fact that plasma being intelligent and having a larger impact on us as brainwaves, species, Earth, Mother Earth, so to speak, Gaia, are we at a point that people are going to start waking up to this, that there's more than just the biological order that we've been told?
I think we could be, but one of the reasons I wrote The Demon in the Acre is I have tremendous respect for Robert Temple for writing the book that he did. Where I would part company from him is the attempt in writing it to buttress and to confirm, so to speak, so-called New Age thinking or context for understanding it. That's why I put that quotation in Demon in the Acre from St. John of Damascus front and center right at the beginning of the book. Because the temptation that people are going to have is once again to run off in their theological illiteracy and forget that we have been here before. And greater minds than Robert Temple and my own have dealt with this process and this type of thinking far longer than we're ready to admit. The old adage about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin being some of the silly debates that the medieval scholastics were, people like Thomas Aquinas. Well, those silly people sitting around and debating all this stuff. Well, if you bother to sit down and read what they were actually saying and why those types of discussions were being held, they were thinking in profoundly higher dimensional mathematical topological ways. And they were thinking, well, what would life be like in those kinds of environments? I mean, even Aquinas's idea that, okay, angels, when they fall, that their habit of will is immediately formed by its first use. Why does he say that? It sounds to us kind of weird, but what he's really trying to say is, what would the will and habit look like in an environment where there was no process of time? That's what he's really trying to resolve. And he's not being irrational when he does it. So what I'm trying to do and get people to stop and think is, we have a whole body of thought that we don't need to redo. Go out and familiarize yourself with it before you haul off and say, well, this is beyond anything that anybody has dealt with before. Baloney it is.
Right.
If you have a St. John of Damascus, an Arab in the 7th century, coming up with an angelic version of the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, you better sit up and take notice, because there's something going on. Okay. And that's pretty much what he did. So this is my problem. And I'm not so much worried about people waking up is that they may wake up and then go out and play around in the sun without any sunglasses and end up blinding themselves. This is the problem I'm having with what's going on. We need to restore some historical, philosophical, theological, traditional, cultural literacy, or we're going to be a mess.
I think we need to restore philosophical absolutes.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. So what led to this conversation with this friend was he was reading Philosophical Lighthouse by Michael Bednarik, and I hadn't read it before. I was familiar with some of his other work, Good to Be King and things like that. But he said, I was shocked to find out that Michael Bednarik was an atheist. And he's here to talk about Robert Temple's book and get into all this. And I'm so glad, because you're hitting the nail on the head of where my thought process was, of you can't ignore Aquinas. You can't ignore even T.S. Eliot.
No.
It's talking, where do we get the overall basis and what is sound philosophical thoughts when we are currently in a moral relativistic society that picks and chooses from a refrigerator, like a cafeteria, selecting, I believe this, I believe that, and I don't believe this, I don't believe that. It's
the bad news is that Plato and Aristotle are not even dishes on the menu inside the refrigerator. No. Nope. The closest that the dishes in the refrigerator in modern America come are the Cliff Notes versions of it.
Yes.
And I'm adamant on this. Education in this country it's a fraud on the American people. It is fraudulent. And the reason that it is, one of the principal reasons that it's fraudulent, is teacher certification and so-called colleges of education. I am so adamant on this. I can't even begin to tell people how screwed up the system is. You cannot have education without primary texts. Period. A textbook initially was a textbook, a book of texts, of primary texts, all in one volume. And you learned how to read. I taught medieval philosophy with a textbook that was a textbook of nothing but texts from Averroes and Avicenna and Peter Lombard and Occam and Aquinas and Albert the Great and so on and so forth. So in other words, if you're going to learn a subject, any subject, I don't care what it is, you always learn from the primary texts of that subject.
Right.
If you're learning physics, go read Einstein, go read Heaviside, go read Maxwell. If you're learning biology, read Darwin and Dalton and Galton and Lobachevsky and people like this. Go read them.
Well, that leads us to a problem, though, Dr. Farrell. Leads us to the problem of it's getting increasingly more and more difficult to get to the primary text.
I know. Tell me about it.
For example, like, Michaels, do you remember growing up, we had Encyclopedia Britannica that was like on the shelf of every single grade school? Like, did you have that in your school?
Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Peruse them.
Yeah. So we had all the different volumes, and our parents would buy us the different encyclopedias. And so you would have kind of a primary source of, hey, here's the agreed upon basics that you need. Nowadays, they don't exist. You go into a public school library, which I'm a public school teacher, so I can speak pretty authoritatively on this. You go into many public school libraries, they're using picture books.
Yes.
At a high school level.
Yes.
Because they've deemed that it's too difficult to relate to the old text of Shakespeare. It'd be too difficult to teach directly from the Republic. Instead, we'll just show you the allegory of the cave. We'll put it up in picture books and, go. We don't learn the Atlantis story that way. Now it's taught through pictures. The reason I bring this up is this ties into the other part that I was talking about earlier, artificial intelligence. I've noticed that things like Google now, which I can't stand Google. They can, take a quick walk off a short pier and I'll be perfectly happy with that. They now have AI results in your Google search because they realized people have stopped using Google, and they're using artificial intelligence in order to do searching. So my question for you is this. How the hell are we going to maintain primary sources when the human species is uploading everything to something that could disappear and the books are literally being burned, literally disappearing?
Well, you maintain it simply by the stubborn refusal to use the new tech. And I know that's a simplistic answer, but that's the only way to do it. I mean, you can see. And I guarantee you, my house is full of books. I've got books in the refrigerator, books on the kitchen floor, books in the spare bedroom, books in the bathroom, in the closet. I mean, everywhere. This is a library, and I just happen to live in it. Okay. And the reason why I have so many books is I cannot write the books that I do off of internet sources. You know, I went around and around with a professor of education in a state school years and years ago, and he was telling me, "No, you have to use this. You have to use the Modern Language Association style manual to reference things in education papers." I said, "No, that's not an adequate orthography at all." He said, "But you must do it." And I said, "Okay, I will bring you a source and you tell me how MLA will reference it." So I brought him a volume of the Patrologia Greco-Latina. Okay. So in other words, the whole thing is in Greek and Latin, and it's got little diacritical marks out in the margins, which you have to know what they are and why they're there. And I said, "Okay, tell me how you reference this with MLA." Well, who wrote it? And I said, "Well, it depends. You know, are you going to talk to the Jesuit editor of the volume? Are you going to talk to the translator into the Latin of this particular work in the volume? You know, who are you talking about here?" You know, so on and on we went. And I finally convinced the guy that, yeah, his MLA method of citation was completely useless, you know, for the kind of academic citation that you would really do in a real academic institution. That's my problem. All right, that's number one. You simply refuse to go along. I write books because I refuse to have my books as ebooks that they can change the formatting or delete or add to at the press of the button at their whim. And by the way, those ebooks will preserve the original formatting of the book, so that screws up your citation. So it makes scholarship impossible. So in other words, don't play their game, number one. Just don't play it. Number two, you have to network and promote connection with, you know, you're a school teacher, so you know firsthand the importance and the difference between actually being in the physical presence of the people you're talking to versus like what we're doing right now on the with the technology, or having everything done over the internet. The result of that is the Isaac Asimov scenario that he outlined in his Foundation series of science fiction, written decades ago, and he's predicting what we're doing right now. In that series of novels, originally a trilogy of novels, you have a galactic empire that has managed to spread all of its wonderful advanced technology throughout the entire galaxy, and it's ruled from a central planet. But the problem is, as people get more and more addicted to the technology, they become less and less able to do things on their own, and the empire starts to, here it comes, listen carefully, starts to fall apart because people no longer remember how to do things. And that's where we are. We're dumbing ourselves down because of the technological addiction. And we're thinking that the dumbed down Cliff Notes version is a replacement for the actual thing.
Right.
And it will never be adequate to that.
That's so interesting, because if you read Credo Mutwa, he was one of the last Zulu historians. It was all oral history, right? And he wrote a few books before he died. He died, I think, almost to be 100 or something. He talks about the origin of evil, and that story has a striking resemblance to the Atlantis myth and what Edgar Cayce talked about where Edgar Casey, for anybody that doesn't know, channeling a whole bunch of information about Atlantis, he talks about how the Atlanteans, as they were leaving Atlantis, as it's submerging and breaking apart, they brought with them what he calls things, which are basically fleshy automatons that do the yeoman's work. And Credo Mutwa talks about the same thing. In Zulu history, it goes so far that people don't even know how to chew anymore. And I think you're 100% correct that we are at that point where people are just lazy and they don't know how to move forward. They don't realize how creative they are. And they don't accept their own divinity.
Right. Now, I think you just fingered something that's very important to the question and to the answer to it. The forgetfulness and the lack of creativity and the lack of imagination. If we look at the way that particularly a modern American, I'm constantly picking on America because I think we're the stupidest people on the planet. If we look at the way a modern American understands or defines intelligence, what do they mean by it? They mean a collection of facts, in other words, a database. And they mean a rudimentary ratiocination about said database. And that might include logical syllogisms if you really want, if you're really getting into the nitty gritty, or it might include a statistical analysis. In other words, they have reduced intelligence to mere ratiocination, and therefore they have reduced its techniques and its expressions to artificial intelligence. Well, we can have all these robots do all this stuff for us. But unfortunately, to the Middle Ages or to the classical age, intelligence was something very much more than mere ratiocination and a mere database. It was wisdom, experience, the passions, imagination, intuition, balance. It was all of these things. Read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and I defy anybody to explain to me how you're going to plug that into an AI program. Okay, it ain't going to work. But this is what they mean by intelligence. So all of this is being enabled by the fact that people are presupposing, going into this discussion, something that isn't true. And unfortunately, we're getting to the stage, Chris, I think that we're dealing with people that are essentially Tartarian Flat-Earthers.
Oh, God. Please don't.
You're striking a nerve with Michaels now.
Please.
Well, in other words, we're dealing with people so fundamentally irrational that you cannot discuss with them. And here's the bad lesson that we all have to learn. Don't waste your time on them.
No, I do. And I do it this way. They all bring up these buildings.
Oh, please. Yes, I know.
No, wait.
The Parthenon in Nashville.
Yes. And what I do is I go to the local archives, the local libraries, and I find the buildings being built, and I just burst all kinds of bubbles.
And then they ban him.
And then they hate me.
And then they ban you. Yes. Yeah. Look, I don't even want to waste my time with such people. No. I had someone tell me that they were a pilot.
Oh.
And that they were flat earthers. And I'm like, okay, how do you plug in your flight plan into your Airbus that's going to fly you from San Francisco to Frankfurt, and oh, well, look, that's a straight line. Just roll out your map. There it is.
Yep.
What do you mean you got to go way up here? No, that's taking a long way around.
Right.
Well, there's only so much stupidity that anyone can handle. And this, incidentally, this is what happens in Asimov's trilogy. There are a group of people that say, yes, we cannot stop this. We simply withdraw and let it happen. But what we're going to be about is what? Owning and preserving the culture. And when that final collapse comes, we're going to be here scratching away in our scriptoria, in our monasteries. And by the way, when the collapse is thoroughly done, we'll be able to do something about it. Okay, and they did. So, we're back in the same position.
It's so funny. I just finished an Edgar Casey book on his channelings of Atlantis, and they talk about the same exact thing. They understand that the cataclysm is going to occur. It's been happening for centuries, and now it's not about stopping it. It's just about preserving and rebuilding. Right. Very, very interesting stuff. Very, very, very serendipitous that we're having this conversation. So
I want to ask, which country would be the best hope that we have of preserving culture?
Sanity,
because it's not the United States.
No,
I mean look at the influencer culture, and you already know that. If you brought up Aristotle, and I bring him up a lot on my Wednesday philosophical shows, where I'll talk about living a virtuous life. What does that mean? We're not living a virtuous life. It used to be that I think the Republican Party was like, hey, we're the party of conservative values and some culture, but I don't think you can say that anymore about America. It's become a parody. So is there a country that you would think might be able to hold the line?
Let me interject with the word values.
That's a good point.
The Republican Party sold out.
Yes.
Because it's not values we should be preserving, it's virtues.
Yes.
And by the way, the root word of virtue is vir. And what's vir? It's the Latin for male, as in male men.
Oh, don't say that too loudly.
Well, I'm going to say it because I'm a crusty old patriarchal curmudgeon. We have witnessed the feminization of culture, and here we are, and I make no bones and no apologies about it. None whatsoever. The problem is that we're in that Asimov cycle. So where do we go? What country do we go? And there are some that I think might be acceptable if they in turn were to be able to really return to their roots and do so in a tolerant way. Japan is one of them. And by the way, they just recently had an election over there, and it was a real wake-up call to the powers that be in Japan, because essentially you just elected a Shinto Japanese populist who wants to restore real power to the imperial family. So
talking about another Magi.
We're talking about a real Japanese sort of version of Trumpism, whatever you want to call it. But this is a movement that's occurring all over the world, and I think Japan would be uniquely positioned, at least as far as Oriental cultures go, to become a kind of cultural standard bearer. I think the same process is underway in China. I mean, if you've been watching what's happening, or rather not happening, with Chairman Xi lately, it appears to me like he's on his way out, and something big is brewing in China. I don't think the CCP within, I give it at best 4 more generations, and I think it'll be a lot faster than that personally. But I think you're going to see a kind of, for want of a better expression, a kind of neo-Confucianism reemerge inside of China. Because, Confucianism was all about what? Was all about the mandate of heaven and preserving good governance to gain the mandate of heaven. So, you've even got this idea in Confucianism. Another one I think that needs to be watched very carefully insofar as Christian culture goes is Russia. Because, I've been saying this for many, many years. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the collapse of the modern secular state as an ideology and as a organizational principle for culture and society. So what do you see Russia engaged upon? Well, Russia if you look at it carefully, it's not a neo-Stalinist state. That's the way the West wants to understand it. What Russia's trying to do is create the first postmodern state. That's what it's trying to do. And as a result, it's moving back to its traditional Russian institutions. So, and funding them, directly from the government. So this is something very, very different. I think you might have a chance that some European countries, some of the smaller ones, might be going the same route. Hungary, certainly. There are signs of it going on in, believe it or not, in places like the Netherlands and Sweden, even Austria. We think of them as the most hardened secular states in Western Europe, but there are these little clues that, people are getting really turned off with process as culture. Because process is never, governmental process in politics is never a substitute for culture. Right. And to me, the weirdest example of this, what would you call it? Traditional cultural populism. I don't know. I don't have a label for it. But the weirdest example of this, I think, is what the Germans just did in Berlin in the last few years. They tore down the old monument to New Soviet Man, or whatever it was that was built by the East German Communist government. They tore that modernist monstrosity down, leveled it. And then they crowdfunded the rebuilding of the old Stadtschloss, the old imperial palace in Berlin, which was located on the same bit of property in central Berlin, and rebuilt the whole facade as it was when Kaiser Wilhelm lived there. They rebuilt this thing. And the kicker of it all is they crowdfunded it. Now, they're planning to turn it into some modern museum of togetherness and kumbaya and all sorts of stuff. So, they didn't get that part right. But what intrigues me here is they're rebuilding a building associated with what? With the ancient regime. That's what they're doing.
So, I don't know how much more time you have. I mean, we're already...
I've got gobs of time. I'm free the rest of the afternoon on up until about 8:00 when I have to take my heart medicine. So,
all right. So
I'm good to go.
It's almost happy hour. Let's sling some drinks.
Well then, should we ask about Epstein?
I
thought we were going to do McCarthy and space.
We do. Yeah.
I want to comment on one thing though, about what you just brought up. I think there was some kind of experiment, some kind of social experiment, government experiment that went on around 1790 with the advent of Napoleon involving the guillotine. Okay. And that is that we are now rejecting divine right. We're now rejecting the royal bloodlines and the Pope. I am now the Emperor of France, Napoleon. It certainly looks like to me that we are now reverting back to divine right. It's almost genetic in us that when society goes too free, we all of a sudden say, hey, wait a minute, we really don't know what we're doing. It's got to be taken over.
It's interesting that you pose that question, because I have a friend and we have privately exchanged emails and many phone conversations over what we're calling the royal hypothesis, which is exactly what you said. This careful, bit by bit, incremental return of the symbols and trappings of royalty. Let me give you a few examples. I just gave you the example of the Stadtschloss in Berlin. Kaiser Wilhelm's palace. And by the way, you can go online and find out that the Hohenzollern family, Prince Georg Friedrich, who's the Kaiser's grandnephew, has been in private negotiations with the German government to recover Hohenzollern lands in the Rhineland. What the heck is going on with this?
Wow.
But it's interesting that you see these symbols and trappings of the ancient regime reappearing. Let me give you two things that stick in my mind, and they're not ignorable. Only the American media can ignore these things, and only the American media can be so blind that it never asks the question, what's going on? Because only the American media can be so dumb. A few years ago, when Emperor Naruhito was officially enthroned after the abdication of Akihito, Naruhito and his wife decided that they would allow the whole ancient Shinto ceremony of the enthronement of an emperor to be broadcast and recorded on television. So you can go on YouTube and watch this very elaborate old Shinto ceremony, and you'll see the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe presenting himself, to the emperor with a little declaration that he reads to the emperor. And it's a very interesting ceremony to watch. But the interesting thing is, why do you see this happening now? Why, even after all the years of tradition in Japan of having the emperor as a kind of closed off figure, why are they allowing people in to see the old ritual that is being performed to install him in office? Okay. So that's a little clue that there's something going on here. The other two cases are, look at Vladimir Putin. Whenever you see him in any sort of official or semi-official state function inside the Kremlin, you're going to see him with the Russian tricolor behind him. But interestingly enough, boldly emblazoned on the tricolor that shows whenever he shows up, you'll see the big double-headed Romanov eagle. So, what's the eagle of the Romanov dynasty all of a sudden doing, being proudly displayed inside the Kremlin again? I thought we got rid of all that when we got rid of the Tsar. Well, the other interesting thing is Grand Duke Mikhail Romanov recently married an Italian countess at a ceremony at some cathedral in St. Petersburg. And again, why this effort to display all of this all of a sudden? If you look at Putin inside the Kremlin, another thing I've noticed, and this floors me to this day. Occasionally you'll see him exiting some, big set of big gold doors, and there will be these guards in their dress uniforms opening the doors for him to come out, and they'll, snap to attention and salute and then close the doors behind him. But look at how they're dressed.
Very imperialistic.
They're dressed in the 18th century uniform of the Preobrazhensky Prakat. That's how they're dressed. They're dressed, in other words, in the regimental uniforms of the Tsar's personal guard. Now, I thought advanced progressive Bolshevism got rid. Yeah, there they are. There they are. Thank you. And there's your double-headed Romanov eagle right behind him. So, what the heck is going on here? Why are these symbols returning? Why are they being featured? And in a certain sense, even delicately pushed in our face. So my friend and I have suspected that there's some sort of the elite communicate in symbols. And there's some sort of message or agenda that's being gradually, very gently rolled out with the communication, I think, of these symbols.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so I'm with you. I think there's something going on here. If we're correct, we should see an increase of them. And just to put the cherry on the sundae, let's remember an unusual thing that happened when President Trump was in his first administration and went over for a state visit to Queen Elizabeth. And I thought at the time, gee, this is what got my friend and I started on this whole royal hypothesis. Uh-huh. He was walking ahead of her.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's And, I don't think that he was doing it because he was a narcissist. She kind of shooed him ahead, if I remember correctly. You go first. And I don't think, again, this is a lady that observed all of those protocols rather scrupulously. So for her to do that was a tremendous, there she is, a tremendous breach of protocol. And there she's gesturing. You go here, and go ahead. So Trump gets to troop the colors with the Queen, and she's behind him. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
So that was one thing, and I thought, well, that's strange. And then we got the word that the United Kingdom invited the United States to join the Commonwealth of Nations, and Trump's response was, "Well, we'll have to think about that." Now, wait a minute, folks. If you join the Commonwealth of Nations, that means the British monarch becomes your monarch.
You just completely tear up the Constitution.
Yeah, just completely tear that thing up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that little business of having Barings Bank underwrite the bonds that we used to buy the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon might have something to do with that. I don't know. Maybe, just maybe. But yeah. What's a British bank doing underwriting the loan for Napoleon when they're at war with him so that we can buy it?
Man. These Europeans, they just don't stop.
No, they don't.
They just don't
they
stop.
don't.
Careful, Joseph. They're not going to let you back over at Oxford.
Yeah.
Oh, listen.
That ship has sailed.
No, actually, it hasn't. I still have, I still have some of my friends from Oxford. We occasionally exchange letters or phone calls and relive the good old days. When Mrs. Thatcher was at Downing Street.
Oh, the Iron Lady.
Yeah, the Iron Lady.
Let's talk about the Falklands while we're at it. Okay, so let me ask that question of one of your fans. I emailed this to you, Joseph, and I think it ties into a lot. I think it ties into the Sonora Aero Club with the airships of the 1800s. I also think it ties into McCarthy, which we alluded to earlier, where McCarthy, during his hearings, is actually trying to uncover a secret space program of some sort.
Yes.
Not necessarily going after communism. Recently, Greg and I had on a guest. His name is Ashton Forbes. He has taken off. He has gained a lot of notoriety, particularly about MH370.
MH370, yeah.
Right. So we had him on to discuss.
I would just like to reiterate, I'm very skeptical still about that video. Michaels is a little bit more on board, but
I am too.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I heard about Ashton Forbes because apparently he referenced me when he was first starting to talk about the video and an interview I had given on George Ann Hughes' show, where at the time, this was about 3 weeks after the disappearance of the flight. At the time, he had all these theories, and I went through each one, and I said, well, I don't believe any of them, so we're left with the theory that makes the most sense. It just went poof.
Right.
And, at the time I said, well, it could be anything, exotic technology that someone was testing or something like that. So, but certainly I've gone back and forth on MH370 from it just went poof to, well, maybe Florence de Chauny, the French journalist, has given as adequate an explanation as anybody, I think, in her book. And even she comes up to a certain point in her book and says, well, beyond this, I can't go because we just don't know. There's still too much here that's a mystery. So I'm still open to the it just went poof theory. My problem is some of the things on the video, to me, they just look photoshopped, to be honest. Videos can be edited. I place as much stock in that as I place in the Zapruder film, which has been edited and re-edited and patched and cobbled together. There's 6 different major versions of it out there. I think you need some sort of eyewitness testimony, and that's the problem. And even the so-called eyewitnesses, we don't really know if what they saw was MH370 or something else. We really don't know.
Right. Well,
but anyway,
he had a question. For
Okay.
you. Because
Ashton Forbes did, or the other?
yes. No,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
Directly to you. One, he wanted to be on a show with you. That was
Ashton Forbes, that's fine by me.
yeah. We tried to get him on. He wasn't available. So he referenced.
Well, he was on with us before, but
he was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he referenced fusion relating to plasma and aneutronic fusion.
Okay.
He wanted your thoughts on that. There was a post. I emailed it to you, but I'll read it for everybody else.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right. Lockheed Martin's compact fusion reactor
Mm-hmm.
must have been using aneutronic fusion reactions,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they weren't concerned with shielding from neutrons. He's referencing, of course, the MH370 disappearance. They were using boron 11 reaction, which is considered impossible due to the temperature requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Normies also think superconductivity only happens near absolute zero, but dense plasma becomes superconductive, according to Miley and others. They also use the powerful magnetic fields to ensure the plasma does not interact with the structure of the device itself.
Right.
And he also references a screenshot. 3 U.S. patents filed by McGuire reveal more details about the reactor. It does appear to be some sort of cusp geometry device, but more complicated than a picket fence. It also appears to have structure known as a magnetic mirror at either end. This acts as a magnetic plug to stop particles from escaping along the axis of the device.
Okay.
So, one potential problem, the screenshot continues with the device, is that has been pointed out by scientists who have spoken with Science Insider, is that it appears to have electromagnetic coils made from superconductor inside the reaction vessel.
Ah, that's very interesting.
If they were in that position in a working fusion reactor, the superconductor would be destroyed by the high energy neutrons that are a product of fusion reactions.
Okay.
Other designs that use high temperature superconductors have more than a meter of shielding to protect magnets from neutrons. Although researchers at MIT believe this could be reduced to as low as 77 centimeters, even if it was possible to reduce this to 70 centimeters and such shielding was added to Lockheed's current designs, researchers say that it would take the device 18 meters across, not the 7 meters that the company is claiming. So I guess the big question here is, what are your thoughts on plasma and aneutronic fusion? Is it possible? Are they using it, and all of that?
Well, he's gone way with that question. I didn't realize that question was from Ashton Forbes. He's gone way beyond the analysis that I first saw him doing of that video that he's claiming
he's
alleging to be of MH370. So he's going way beyond. It sounds to me like what he's trying to do is what I was trying to do in my books about the Nazi bell: take known details and simply reverse engineering these individual details to see if we could come up with a plausible possible explanation as to what they might have been doing or thinking. Number one, I definitely think aneutronic fusion, as he's calling it, is a possibility, because if you look at what I wrote about the Nazi fusion project being conducted in Argentina for Juan Perón, you'll find elements in the details of that project that are very similar to what he just described, including the idea of a rotating plasma, including the idea of a much lower temperature at which you might be able to induce fusion in a plasma, and even to the extent, and here comes a real kicker that really caught my ear and what he just outlined for you. In Richter's own explanations of what he was attempting to do for Juan Perón, he mentions not only that he's rotating his plasmas and pulsing them at the Lamore precession frequency. So in other words, he's introducing a precessional wobble into his rotation device, okay, somehow. But the other interesting thing that he mentions as a component, a chemical component of his plasma compound, which, by the way, he's saying it's being done with lithium-7, and this was one of the things I think that got him into trouble with the experts at the time, was he was saying he's getting fusion results from lithium-7, which, of course, we thought would not fuse, particularly at the temperatures he was claiming to be doing it. So what do? We let off Castle Bravo, our first hydrogen bomb, and it runs away to 15 megatons when we were only expecting 7. And then our experts tell us, oh, well, we made a boo-boo, a tiny little boo-boo. The lithium-7 entered the fusion reaction, and we didn't think it would. Whoops, sorry about that. Which I just, if that alone boggles the mind, especially when you have a guy who unfortunately used to be a Nazi working for Juan Perón that says, yeah, lithium-7 works just fine. And by the way, he even told the Air Force this. This is why the Air Force went down to interview him.
Wow.
Anyway, so Richter's down there, but the other element that he says, I'm adding a little bit of boron to my lithium plasma mix. So in other words, what Ashton is telling me, yeah, I'm listening to Ronald Richter talking in 1952 to the press conference that Juan Perón has called everybody together to, hey, we've got the secret to the hydrogen bomb down here in Buenos Aires. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff about this kind of fusion. The other thing that I'm thinking of when he's describing this is when Lockheed Martin first, as I like to call it, first came out with its fusion reactor. It showed a picture of this spherical thing that was about 3 feet in diameter with all these, electrodes and stuff sticking off of the sphere. And I wrote a blog about it when they ran that commercial on my website. I don't remember how many years ago it is. But if you look at that device that they show in the commercial, it looks like a blown up version of Philo Farnsworth's patents on what he called a plasmator and a fusator, which was a little spherical device that he invented in 1965 for IT&T with these little electrodes sticking off of the ball. It was about the size of a softball. And he gave a press conference in 1965 where he claimed that he was trying to get fusion reactions in this little ball. Fusion. And he claimed to have sustained a reaction using these little devices with his vacuum tubes for about half a minute in 1965 with, here it comes, vacuum tubes. Now, what was he doing? Well, if you read his patents carefully, what he was doing was he was enclosed, the little knobs sticking off the ball were particle accelerators. And they were injecting particles at a central point, which he then encapsulated within a cathode and an anode. So he was using virtual electrodes in some form or fashion. If you read the patents, he was using these virtual electrodes as his containment. Now, he gave this press conference, and then Philo Farnsworth and these little devices drop off the radar screen from that point on. You never hear about Philo Farnsworth again, much less about these little patents that are there in the record. You can go look at them. IT&T owned the patents. There's a little clue for you. And you never hear from them again. And then all of a sudden, decades later, 4 decades later, out comes Lockheed Martin with a thing that looks like it's based on Philo Farnsworth's patents. So are they researching neutronic fusion? You betcha they are. Of course they are. Why? Because if they can make it work, you can have a hydrogen bomb without the necessity for an A bomb. Huh.
It's interesting. Like Philo Farnsworth, I teach about him in my class.
Good for you.
He was 21 years old when he invented the television, which I always ask my students, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
But there's a dispute on who actually invented the television, and see if Farrell knows this.
A Russian.
Vladimir Zworykin. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I teach about him as well. So that, coupled with Nikola Tesla and the intermingling, don't even get me started on David Sarnoff, the Titanic, and the fact that he had military ties, and then they brought him basically up with the first government, CBS, was it NBC? NBC.
Yep.
And RCA, he controlled everything. Anyway, the interesting part about this is you could actually make a case that there was multiple between Marconi in Italy, Zworykin in Russia, Farnsworth, Sarnoff, who had ties to Russia as well, that there was a national movement across the globe for technology that was maybe ancient technology.
Yes.
Being rediscovered.
Yes.
And I know that's up your alley, but it looks like that was the Renaissance era, that we had reconnected for the first time in hundreds of years with technology that we had forgotten about, that had been rediscovered through these individuals in America, Russia, Italy, France. They all played a big role in that.
Have you read my book, Babylon's Banksters?
No, but I will now.
Yeah, go do so. Because you're dealing with very clever, smart men. Many of them would have been classically educated. And thus, they may have run across an old Roman author by the name of Juvenal. Okay? And if you read old Juvenal, occasionally he mentions something that if you're a classics literature scholar, you're going to write down to just a bit of ancient Roman science fiction imagination, where you would read a passage that went something like, well, the emperor sent off to General so-and-so in Tunisia and received a reply the next day.
That seems pretty quick.
Yeah, well, if you're using the standard academic explanation of, well, the Romans had a semaphore system where they would light fires, and then one fire being lit would lead to another fire being lit, and they transmitted by smoke signals all the way around the Mediterranean, all of this nonsense that they dream up to explain passages like that. Well, along comes a German physicist and engineer. Wouldn't you know, he had to be German. And his name is Dr. Konstantin Meil. And he wrote a book called Scalar Waves, of all things. And he points out something that to this day, I put this in Babylon's Banksters because I was just thoroughly gobsmacked at what Meil was saying. The first thing he says is, if you look at a lot of those ancient temples, what you're looking at is a radio resonant cavity.
Oh, like a radio photo.
Like an oracle.
And bingo.
Yep.
And how would you use them? Well, the simplest way would be through telegraphy. Dots and dashes, pulses.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, that's for the transmitting aspect of it. But what about the receiving aspect of it? Well, how do you do that? Well, it says Dr. Meil, And by the way, this may explain why you see references to all of this stuff in all that ancient literature. You'd need a very sensitive membrane that would respond to very minute pulses, like animal entrails.
Oh.
So you're going to read the little twitches and pulses in a dead animal's entrails and decipher the Morse code that way. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is a really interesting theory we've got cooking up here in good old Germany. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this means if Dr. Mile can see this and think of all this, there's got to be gobs of engineers out there that are going to go in, like Chris Dunn walks into the Great Pyramid and says, oh, well, this isn't to bury a guy. This is a machine. It doesn't take much to see that it's a machine. So, yeah, you're going to say, well, this is some sort of machine. It's a radio resonant cavity, a very simple one, but it's a radio resonant cavity. And then he puts the cherry on the sundae. And this is the one I just love. And I have this diagram of his in Babylon's Banksters because, hats off to Dr. Mile for pointing this out. He says, if you look at the floor plan of the Pantheon in Rome, one of his radio resonant cavities, if you look at the floor plan, golly, it almost looks like a magnetron. And I thought, okay, so we've not only got radio, we've got an essential component for radar while we're at it. So yeah, I think there's something to all this. And I have run across the really interesting thing to contemplate is not only those classical references like you find in Juvenal, right? You can find interesting little tidbits in a book called Occult Theocracy. Who's that by? It's an old book. I got it over there on my shelf. I should have looked up the lady's name that was the authoress of it. But she points out that there is a letter from one Mason to another about using the frog from the 19th century. And you have to press down this little piece on the frog, and then you can talk to your brother Mason who's miles away. Well, she says, well, obviously they're talking about some sort of telephone, before there's a telephone, or maybe even a radio. So yeah, I think they've had this technology for quite some time. And then there's Tesla's comment that, yeah, I'm getting radio signals before we have radio, getting radio signals from Mars. Well, might he have been picking up somebody else's signals from right here on Earth, that had access to a secret technology? We've got to remember something, and I always like to use this example. The physics and the technology was there for lasers in 1934. They weren't invented until 1958, I think, was the first maser, and the first optical laser was about 1961. So about 30 years. However, there is all of that intriguing suggestion that I covered in my book, The Philosopher's Stone, that the reason the Nazis were enriching so much uranium to such high purity without typical Allied centrifuges and sluice gates and, cyclotrons and so on, was that they were experimenting with chemical laser enrichment, which is the most efficient way to enrich uranium. And, and by the way, not labor intensive. So, yeah, I covered that in The Philosopher's Stone. But, yeah, I think the Nazis were doing something with chemical laser enrichment, especially when you read the farm hall transcripts and they're describing what they were doing and trying to avoid giving away too much because they know the British are listening to them. it's really an interesting thing. So yeah, I have no problem with the idea of advanced technology existing privately and secretly decades ahead of where it comes out publicly.
So Ashton just sent me a message, told him that we asked about the endotronic fusion, and he said, ask him about using fusion for propulsion, can mention dense plasma focus research by the Air Force.
A plasma focus, would that work? I think probably, but the problem with plasma is, first of all, the plasma life hypothesis. Plasmas are notoriously uncooperative. Can you focus it? Yeah. But are you always, from what I know of it, and I don't know that much about the subject at all, so I'm going on just little shards of information. From what little I know of it, you're never going to get 100% certain results with plasma. Hannes Alfvén, the Swedish physicist that really kind of started plasma cosmology, and I talk about him in my book, The Cosmic War, a great deal, along with his student, Dr. Peratt. The problem with plasmas, and this becomes very evident when you sit down and read Dr. Alfvén's published theoretical papers in it, is that it's very uncooperative. You can only get a kind of statistical efficiency with various models working with them. You never get a 100% reduplicatable phenomena because they just don't always respond the same way. So plasma focus, yeah, will it work? Might it not sometimes work? Well, yeah, that's probably true too.
I mean, this reminds me that it's almost as if, assuming that these plasmas are intelligent, you're almost trying to play God.
Yeah.
You're trying to corral this kind of energy.
Well, this is the problem, and this is why you have the plasma life hypothesis, and as a subset of that, some of them might be intelligent. Because what starts all of this off is as I tried to show in The Demon and the Acre, and that Robert Temple was commenting on long before I ever talked about it. What starts all this off was David Bohm, the famous physicist, noticing that plasmas were responding in a manner that was very, very similar to organic life. And that's actually what put him off of plasma research, because it's a step from plasmas responding organically to plasmas responding intelligently.
Right.
And anybody that's researched the literature of ball lightning will tell you that there are some cases of ball lightning clearly acting as if it's under some sort of intelligent control and direction. So, it may be a case that you're dealing with an intelligent life form of some sort. I mean, look at the octopus. The octopus bears no resemblance to any organic life on the surface of the planet, and it's got 9 brains, and and yet it's a very intelligent creature.
It's interesting.
I'm going to be right back.
Yeah,
sure.
I have a canine recharge situation going on.
You take care
here.
of Maga.
So I will be right
Maga,
back.
and I will continue on.
Your dog is named Maga?
No, not M-A-G-A. Mega.
Mega.
M-E-G.
Oh, Mega. Okay.
Yeah. We adopted him, so we didn't name him that. I was never.
I was going to say, you're a real diehard enthusiast.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I always call his dog Maga.
Yeah, you tweak the knife every time you do it.
Absolutely.
It just hurts me. It's good.
Hey, so this is I'll take this an odd place. Have you ever heard about the Marine Mammal Protection Act that went in place to make it illegal with dolphins? You can't interact with them, touching a wild dolphin and stuff. I'm going to go a place with this, but are you familiar with that?
Well, I can't say with certainty that I'm familiar with that specific act. I've heard of a lot of acts regarding oceans and marine life, but if that specific
so
one,
the MMPA passed in 1972, and basically, if you communicate with a dolphin in the wild, stick with me on this. meaning you make sounds, you gesture to them, you swim up to them. It could be illegal if it happens to alter their natural behavior or cause a disturbance. There is another theory that's actually out there, because if you go back to the 20th century, Dr. Lilly did some communication experiments, and basically there were some ethical issues, but claimed to kind of figure out a little bit of the language of the dolphins, a little bit. Artificial intelligence now is listening to dolphins and is able to start to figure out what the communications are. And there's been articles written that people believe that we're very close to being able to figure out how animals communicate using AI. What's the possibility, just putting a conspiracy out there, just labeling it the way it is, that this act prohibiting us is actually because the dolphins could communicate with us, likely on the secrets of what's in the water? Because dolphins as a mammal are the closest thing that we have to humans as far as the way they express their empathy, their feelings. They're very odd creatures. I'm just curious, in your history, looking through things, was there ever anything about dolphins or animal communications in ancient history that we could mimic and find ourselves back in? I know it sounds a long-winded way to get there, but that's where I wanted to go.
Is there?
Yeah.
Of course there is.
Okay.
Ever heard of Oannes?
No. Tell me more.
Oannes is the Babylonian fish god.
Okay.
And you'll see sometimes depictions of Oannes with a human head inside of a fish's mouth. Okay? It's a Babylonian Sumerian god that supposedly emerged from the sea and conveyed all sorts of scientific knowledge and technology to kickstart human civilization. And not only that, but if you look at this Babylonian god, there are little suggestions he's kind of a Poseidon. But remember, this is a man inside a fish. So in other words, the idea is being conveyed that he's primarily fish with human-like intelligence. Okay, this is the way I think you would have to interpret the Babylonian mythological symbolism. But you will find Oannes front and center in their civilization creating myths, to the extent that when Alexander the Great charges Berosus to draw up the history of Babylonia in Greek, so that Alexander and his generals know, the history of what they're ruling, that Berosus includes the mythology of Oannes. And let's put another little cherry on top of this sundae for you, since you mentioned conspiracy.
Sure.
There are indications that John F. Kennedy was very interested in the Oannes mythology.
Interesting.
Very.
Wow.
Yeah, very. Yeah. So you can make of that what you will. But again, we have this idea of high civilization connected with the seas, and a fish emerging from the sea and giving all of this knowledge to humanity. Gratis. Here, take it.
Yeah. I don't know. I saw somebody talking about the dolphins at one point, and I was talking to my wife last night about it, and I said, what are the possibilities that they can communicate with dolphins, and we don't like what they would tell people if people figured it all out? I know.
Well, I think that's that's as possible as anything else. Yeah. I mean, first of all, we're living in the death of the Cartesian binary way of looking at the animal creation.
Right.
There is a definite break between humans and animals, but yet we're also part of a continuum. And animals clearly have some sort of intelligence.
Do you see what dogs are doing right now?
Oh, yes, I do.
They're able to take routes on buses, and find their way into town, and then find their way back on the same bus.
Yeah,
that's wild.
It's not wild to me. I think it's.
Oh, yeah.
I think the other part of it is is, the ancient view is that mankind is the microcosm of the macrocosm. And therefore, as such, we exist, we were, in terms of Genesis, we were given dominion over the animals. But that dominion, if you look at that idea of man as a microcosm, it's not a dominion that we exercise by raw power. It's rather a dominion that we have in terms of similitude to animals. So in other words, we're emotional creatures. We create, we make sounds to express happiness, displeasure, sadness, and so on. So in other words, we're part of what it is that we have dominion over. And as a component of that, I think it's also a part of our role, in that capacity, we're priests and kings in creation. And therefore, our role is to not only be deified with respect to God, but our role in turn is to extend that deification and humanization to the animal kingdom. So in other words, this is a very, very different cosmology than this Cartesian machine, universe that we're all accustomed to living in. And to me, the metaphor makes a lot more sense, because the universe is much more like a living organism than it is a machine.
Right.
So, I think we're just at the cusp of a massive paradigm change is what I'm suggesting in terms of our cosmology. And quite frankly, it's one that I think is long overdue.
I'm curious, though, won't the overlord, so to speak, use that in order to get people to stop eating meat and to get their agenda?
No, I think it'll be twofold. They'll not only use it that way against us, they will also succumb to the occult view that you actually consume the very essence of something else by eating it. It's the materialist reduction all over again, but in the reverse way that you're suggesting. And of course, the essence of something is never just completely material. That's the other part of the problem.
Well, that goes into church teaching, transubstantiation.
Absolutely. It's a component of the cosmology that used to be very much a part of functioning Western culture, is I think what we're both getting at, and because of the Victorian Newtonian mechanistic materialist universe that came into existence in the 16th and 17th century, and that we've been living in ever since, we're not looking at the rest of creation, and particularly the animal creation, the right way. And this is why we have so much difficulty with the idea that, plasma life, much less intelligent plasma, are you kidding? Because we're so wedded to this Cartesian materialism that we can't think of any other way.
Michaels, we just got into whether we could communicate with dolphins, etc. And we got into Babylonian, the fish god. And so you missed a good conversation.
Oh, Dagon. Yeah, sure.
Dagon is
that's
one word for
alternate name, I guess.
Yeah, Oannes is usually the Greekified word for it.
That's what I wrote down on my paper. I got a lot of homework to do. I got a lot to look up.
Just so you know, my camera is being very difficult.
It looks like you look great. You look like $1 million.
Where'd I go?
Well, now it's your hand.
Yeah,
but
my camera will not focus on me anymore, so I may have to readjust this.
I can tell you look in focus. So
yeah, you're looking fine here.
No. It's automatic, so it tries to follow me around. So if I let go of it,
I see what you're saying.
So
yeah,
I'm gonna have to readjust here.
That makes you look like a Picasso painting.
Oh no, we don't want that. I drop off with art history at around Bauhaus. Once I'm off. Forget about it. I love between 1790 and about 1920. You go from neoclassicism through romanticism, impressionism, and all that, and then once you get to Bauhaus, punching out. I don't like the doctor chairs.
I'm more or less in the same camp. I'm not any sort of modernist at all. Mm-mm. I will I'll bend the knee to a little neoclassicism in music, but that's about it.
Right.
Ooh, okay.
But as for me and my artistic tastes, we are thoroughly grounded in the 18th century.
You're more of a Baroque era.
I'm Baroque and classical, in
yep.
both terms of music and art. I do like some of the romantic composers, but by and large, the romantic composers I like are still solidly within what I would call the
Same style.
They're composers that are solidly within the Effektenlehre tradition. Saint-Saëns is one of them. Charles-Marie Widor, the famous organist composer, an arts traditionalist when it comes to composition. No, little girl.
Oh, I hear the same thing. I just had the same thing go on with me.
Romanticists like Berlioz or Debussy, not so much. I like some of Liszt. I like Chopin, Rachmaninoff, but I'm not a big Tchaikovsky fan.
No. Okay.
So it depends on the romantics.
We should do a show, Greg, all about music. Because I'm pretty sure Dr. Joseph Farrell can bring out the esotericism in music and incorporate that into cathedral construction and all the rest.
Oh, I wrote the beginning of my book, Microcosm and Mediator, or not Mediator, Microcosm and Medium. I talk in the first 2 chapters about music and the doctrine of Effektenlehre. And in fact, you can go on my website into my members area. If you're interested in this, shoot me an email and I'll send you videos to a couple of little talks I did about Effektenlehre, because it is a very, very different aesthetical philosophy that's at work in the 18th century and the 19th. In fact, for me, the big no, it's in my members area. You won't be able to access it publicly. You'll have to go. You'll have to go into the pay area. Oh, you can do that.
Yeah. So just so everybody, I just wanted to put this up so the people watching go to GizaDeathStar.com, and then you can become a member, and they have the members area here. You can go through and find. So I just want people to see it so that way they're familiar.
But you can email me and I'll shoot you the videos that I talk about Effektenlehre. But I talk about it in Microcosm and Medium. And the reason why I talk about it is that the fundamental change in artistic cosmology is not between the Renaissance and the post-Renaissance period. The fundamental change in philosophical aesthetics is between the Baroque and Classical era and the Romantic era. Because the composers, believe it or not, the composers of the Baroque and Classical era were not interested in originality or self-expression, and yet they wrote tremendously original works, and there's a reason for that. And it's all coming out of their cosmology, and that cosmology in turn is, particularly in the case of J.S. Bach, it is clearly, explicitly, unapologetically Christian. Wow, absolutely. You can't understand his music without it.
Well, I had the opportunity to sing at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
New York City?
Yep. Mozart's Mass in C minor, which was beautiful.
It is a beautiful piece.
One of the highlights of my college career.
And again, when you're dealing with Mozart or Haydn or Handel or any of these people, you're dealing with composers that are, that was how they were trained. They were trained in these doctrines and how to express these doctrines musically. And I'll send you guys the links to these little talks if you just shoot me an email and remind me. One of them is about 20 minutes long. The other one is about 40 minutes long. And it's just a talk about how they're encoding things into their music with a few little examples of it. But it changes when you get to people like Beethoven. Beethoven starts out in that philosophy, and then ends by jettisoning all the cosmological claptrap, so to speak, and ends in this quest for self-expression and originality. And ultimately, you end up with Arnold Schoenberg, down that path, where you lose musical objectivity completely.
Right.
It's a fascinating study to undertake.
I think all musicians do. I mean, so
Yeah,
using
absolutely.
Mozart, I mean, his final work, I think, was the Requiem.
The Requiem, yes.
You know, so it's interesting to see he went through a couple different masses and then ending back there as well.
Ending back with the Requiem, and
Yep.
his last two piano concerti are also very, very interesting in terms of what you're hearing in them, and then what's coming after them in music history, particularly the C minor, the final movement of the C minor, which is just it's a look backward and forward, and very deliberately so.
So I guess as we're rounding out here, 2 hours and some odd minutes, 2.5
And we didn't
hours.
even do McCarthy yet.
I know. That just means we have to do it next time. So you have the new book out. I want to obviously put this up there. The Rialto in Richmond Reconstructed. You can go find it. Confederates, Canada, and Carpetbaggers. What was one little nugget that would want people to read this? What was something that totally startled you in researching this and putting it together?
Beyond any shadow of a doubt, the very last chapter in that book, the chapter that's not the conclusion chapter, beyond any shadow of a doubt, there is at work in all of the skullduggery and shenanigans and cabals, canards, conspiracies that went on in the Civil War. There is at work, in my opinion, one individual with a genius for espionage, grift, fraud, troublemaking, gaslighting, false narratives, you name it. This one individual did it. And most people don't even know his name. And in fact, there's not even a picture of the man or a daguerreotype or a painting or a sketch anywhere.
Wow.
And he really existed. Why? Because this man's testimony was the crucial testimony that got the 4 Lincoln conspirators hung. But
I was going to say Stanton,
no.
but we all know what happened with him.
Stanton is one of those people floating in the punch bowl at the opera intermission. But no doubt about it.
Yeah, that was a day after a Guinness rampage in the punch bowl with Stanton.
Yeah, but this guy is the real piece of work, and most people have never heard his name.
I also want to give people this website. This is Lulu, where you can find a ton of other books that Dr. Farrell has been referencing throughout.
The 2 McCarthy books are on the Lulu books. Yeah.
Now, do we need to read the book to get the name, or are you going to
yes,
drop
of course. We're not going to spill
Yes,
the beans now.
I'm not writing these books for entertainment.
Come on.
I know. So everybody's got to read the book to find out.
Listen. Book writing is as hard as men are ever going to get to childbirth. I mean, this is not fun to do, guys.
Oh man, but it's funny. My daughter is going into freshman year of high school, and she's working on her 3rd book. And she started writing when she was in 5th grade, and she'll write 300 to 500 page books. And she has all these pieces of paper all over her room, mapping out her characters, figuring out the narrative. Wow. I'm so proud of her. Like that's a phenomenal thing. Like, but it's a labor of love.
Yes,
to watch somebody go through that.
Jane Austen in the making.
Yeah, I've tried to write books. I really have, and let me tell you, it's
work.
I've picked it up, and I've never finished any. Maybe someday, Michaels, you'll get a Boulden book, but not
all right. Sounds good. I mean, I would assume if I were to try,
I'm satisfied with the fanfare and the grand chorus.
There you
Oh,
go.
do we have that
stick,
fired up?
I'll stick to the music. Absolutely. We do. We're going to fire it up here at the end. As always, Dr. Farrell, it's been a pleasure. We've covered the gamut of conversation. We have plenty more we can speak to you about too in the future. We got to get back to McCarthy, Monmouth, and Space Force somehow with Michaels. We left that one on the table. And I'll be very curious to follow back up with you about the Trump presidency, what we've been seeing, because
Trojan horse.
yeah, I'm getting concerned, but we'll follow that up and we'll leave that for another show.
I'm kind of like the person that is tied between four horses ready to be galloped off in different directions. And yes, I'm getting concerned.
Yeah. I'll tell you something after we log off tonight.
Okay.
And, we'll leave the audience waiting, but there is a specific reason why I am not podcasting nearly as much and just doing larger interviews now instead of trying to have daily content. I think my focus is going to be on bringing people conversations like this from here on out. I think it's much more important to have that, but we'll talk off air and I'll fill you all in.
All right.
Michaels, phenomenal time as always.
Thanks,
Dr. Farrell, thank you so much. Wish you well. Everybody, go buy the books
and read them.
And
yes,
read them.
Don't just put them on the shelf.
Otherwise, you won't know who that one person is.
Yes, that's right.
Take care, everybody. Be bold.
Yep, bye-bye.
Good night.
Deep in the archives where the shadows play, he digs through history, clears the gray. Ancient tech, forgotten lands, mysteries crumbling in his hands. From the Giza pyramids to cosmic schemes, financial warfare and hidden dreams, connecting dots where none appear, Dr. Farrell makes it clear. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell unveiling the truth, breaking down secrets with wisdom and proof, from ancient stones to banking lies. He's got the keys to open our eyes. Mysteries unravel at his command, following clues across every land. Truth seeker, fearless and bold, Dr. Farrell, the stories unfold. Black projects, hidden texts so vast, legacies buried in our past. Geopolitics, alchemy's flame, he maps it out, calls every name. Books like blueprints for the mind, guiding us through past and find. No stone unturned, no theory missed, Dr. Farrell tops the list. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell unveiling the truth, breaking down secrets with wisdom and proof. From ancient stones to banking lies, he's got the keys to open our eyes. He's a scholar, a rebel, a voice for the brave, uncovering secrets that time couldn't save. A legend, a thinker, a guide through the haze, Dr. Farrell.